Hi, this is Shashi Saluna from Live Tantra, and today I'm exploring a really important topic that we find in Tantra, which is what do we do when things go wrong or when things are left feeling unresolved? There are many cases when people dive into Tantra, either a workshop or a one-on-one session with a tantric therapist or healer, and afterwards they're left feeling uncomfortable or maybe even downright violated and need to get some kind of resolution. So with me today is Anaïsa Seneda, who is working with safe mediation. She's a mediator, as well as having trained in Tantra, and she has been working with several of these kind of cases. So I thought it would be great to have a chat together all about this situation. So
Hello,
welcome.
Shashi.
Hi, thanks for being here. So, Anaïsa, this topic is such an important topic, and in many professional worlds, there are systems put in place to take care of people's vulnerability when they are entering into therapy or self-development. Whereas in Tantra, it's a relatively new field, and so this is sort of like not fully established yet. However, you have already been working with some people. Before we dive into that, can you share a little bit what kind of issues are coming up for people that need to be resolved?
Yeah, sure. So in the context of Tantra, in our culture, like it's very much many workshops and retreats are related to sexuality as well, exploring the shadows. And that's a very, very great terrain, especially because in our Western culture, like, we are not taught clearly how to set boundaries. And when you go into edgy things like sexuality, it can be really blurry, like how far do I go? And so issues around boundaries and consent come up quite a lot in the mediation rooms. Also issues around abuse, sexual abuse or sexual misconduct, sexual harassment, like where to place some behaviors from teachers or assistants or other participants, like how to place that behavior that seems a little bit off, but it's hard to judge or to put it into a category. Like, is it a crime? Is it abuse? Is it just a little bit over, or is just me? That's so a lot of questions arise about trying to understand those dynamics in more edgy workshops.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and listening to you, I mean, I'm so familiar with all of this, having watched Tantra evolve in 20 years. I know that the earlier teachers who were first teaching Neo-Tantra, they've shared with me, well, we had no idea what went and what didn't go. They're kind of working it out as they went along. And so that's always a problem. And I think to this day, sometimes participants don't know what's expected. So there are also some kind of collective assumptions, like if you sleep with a teacher or the guru, you will get some kind of magical transmission. And, these kind of assumptions are there, which really cloud and confuse things up, right? So
yeah. Also, in one-on-one sessions, you have like Tantra massage, Yoni massage, Lingam massage. It can be very intimate, and especially people who book it for the first time, they don't know what to expect, and many times it's not clear to them how far the session will go. And at some point, they say, is this what I signed up for? Yeah.
And of course, when, as we all know, when your body's feeling aroused, then your mind doesn't work in quite the same way for decision making. So this really adds to the convolution of the whole thing.
Yeah, and that goes into the topic of talking about boundaries. Many times the practitioner talks about boundaries beforehand, but once you are in an aroused state, in an altered state of consciousness, you have something we call somatic consent. Is your body giving consent? That's can be very different from you giving consent with your mind. Mm-hmm. And many people get lost into that.
Yeah. There can be a difference between what the mind wants, what the body wants, and that's very confusing for people. Yeah. yeah, I definitely work a lot with my own students to try and help with empowerment. And I think it's really great to work with your own gender for a while until you heal a lot of issues before you start working in mixed gender classes. But of course, many people do dive into mixed gender classes as their first experience. And so, yeah, there can be a lot of cloudy areas. So you're working with mediation, right? Can you tell us a little bit about what that is, what that looks like?
Yeah, well, mediation, there are many styles of mediation. You have the more legal, like many people think, oh my God, it's something related to lawyers in court. It can be. The way I work with mediation is more called transformational mediation. It's pretty much focused on looking into two individuals who got into a situation that generated misunderstandings or a lack of clarity, and looking into how we can open that Pandora box, open and see what was there that was not processed before. If any trauma was created by that interaction, looking into that together and learning from that. And it's pretty much focused on the emotions, the feelings, the needs that were not addressed at the time, and any wounds that were left like overlooked, and finding restoration there.
And restoration, so is it just conversation, oh, this happened and these are my feelings? Or when you say restoration, is there any kind of action that needs to happen in these sessions?
Yeah, this is very much action oriented as well. It's a learning conversation with a proactive steps. It's very much based in restorative justice, especially when there is a power dynamic in place. For example, a teacher and a student, or a practitioner and a client, where there is an authority of the teacher or the service provider, the masseur. There is a power dynamic there, and in that case, we work with a system called restorative justice that is looking into how can we make justice to the part that were more vulnerable in the room, usually the student or the client, and in a way that is restorative for everybody involved, in a way that is not punishing or feeding the anger or feeding shame or guilt. So that's where the restorative justice is looking, how can we repair the harm caused in a way that the person who experienced the harm or the abuse can restore their power, can restore their voice, and the person who caused harm can restore their behavior and can learn from that.
Mm-hmm. Because often I notice that people do feel a lot of anger. We've watched the whole Me Too movement coming, and like sometimes there's so much rage coming up. I mean, actual rage, and a desire for kind of stopping this person. Like I've heard a lot of times, oh, I don't ever want this person to do it to anybody else. I've got to stop them. They've got to be stopped. But you're saying that's not the way that restorative justice is going. What happened? What do you do with that charge, with that anger? What's the best way through that?
Yeah. Well, that's the key question, I would say. The first thing I do when I'm working with someone who has a lot of anger is like, there is some legitimacy in that feeling, because some harm was caused, and there is a part in that person who wants to protect the wounded self. And so I don't want to push that away, but we don't want to use that anger to destroy, because it can destroy everyone involved, including the person who is angry. One important distinction to make is the person who caused harm was acting from a place of unconsciousness, from a place of shadow. And in many cases, in most cases, I would say all cases, they have no idea. They don't have a full idea of the impact that they caused. So we look into what you are angry at. Don't be angry at the person, but be angry at the situation, at the fact, at the impact. And another concept I bring to that is fierce compassion. So how can we be compassionate towards the person who caused harm, at the same time be fierce and stop that to occur in the future? you
So
know?
in fact, what you're talking about is kind of waking them up, like waking them up out of their shadows, you know, by giving them that feedback of the impact that it had. And that should hopefully, them being a human being with a heart, stimulate them to awaken to the fact they were acting out of the shadow and choose to act differently in the future. Is that the hope that we
Is that a hope, and is that something that has been achieved in
Mhm.
learning conversations? And when one person is given power, one person is in a position of power as a teacher, a facilitator, it is a very vulnerable place to be as well. And what I know and I learned by listening to them is the intention behind the act is pretty much good. When you dig further, why they did what they did, like there was a good intention there. It's just the strategies or the way they did things was really didn't work the way they were expecting, and the impact could be tremendously negative. So we also differentiate intention versus impact there.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I really hear that. That
And
sounds.
once they start understanding the impact that was caused, and they start listening to different people who experienced similar situations, then like the more feedback they can get, the more light we put into that shadow, and transformation in behavior occurs. Yeah, it's very much different from pointing fingers and shaming the person for doing something or finding punishment for that, because that will just create that type of punishing behavior will feed a need for the ego to defend itself and shut down.
Yeah. Absolutely. I was just going to say, like, as a facilitator, I have learned the best way I can grow is feedback. And there have been times that I have not been able to receive it because of the way it comes at me. Like, you just like you said, like ego defense comes up. Like when it feels like an attack, it, you know, it's like the heart doesn't want to let it in, actually. I had it a lot when I ran a retreat center, you know, and people would just want to come and say the water in the shower was cold or whatever. But if they came attacking me, like, I paid this, it would be so hard to receive that sometimes I would need to protect myself. But then people feel like they're not being heard and they get angrier. So I totally know how that can snowball, and how important it is to be safe as a facilitator as well, or as a professional, to be safe to receive that feedback, because that feedback is so valuable. But often we don't realize when we're delivering feedback that, you know, it's not gonna actually land from the way we're delivering it. So I'm guessing that that's where you come in, right?
Exactly. It's as well, like the person who is angry or who wants to give feedback or wants to find a resolution has a good intention to restore behavior, to illuminate the shadows.
Yeah.
But the impact on their communication can be very damaging if not properly done. So the role of mediation, and I come in as a mediator, is to give structure and assessments on how to communicate, how to convey the message so it lands. So the heart, not only the mind, but the heart of the person who needs to listen will be open to receive that. And there are several tools that are in the toolkits that I use in the sessions. And I would say beyond that is working with all the layers of the body, like working with exercises and bringing the physical body to the session, not only the talking, not only the mental analytical body or the words, but also the body language. And that's why I work a lot with the breath, and also in a spiritual level as well. How can that soul connect and open up and ignite a transformation within? Yeah.
That's so beautiful. Yeah, because in my experience of these things, we can get so charged on both sides, right? We can get charged up when we feel that we have received injustice. We get very charged when we don't feel heard as well. But then I also know the other side, that you can get really charged up when feedback's coming at you in a way. So how do you handle this even before conversations happen? You know, when you've got charge on both sides. Is there a way to make it easier?
That's the most challenging part of the work, I would say, because the thought of having a conversation with a counterpart, or the thought of voicing something, is the most scary thing you could ever feel. It's much more scary to have that thought than actually having the conversation with the person you experience the conflict or an issue with. Is that the moment where most of the cope mechanisms come up to protect the person? So it's really normal to feel like frozen and tired and not wanting to go there. And then that voice in your head starts telling you, I don't need this. It's not necessary, or I am over it. I already did a lot of work on that. It's over, tending to diminish the importance of that issue for your body. But the body keeps the score, right? That's why it's so important to really go into the body and catch those resistances. And I can catch resistance during the mediation session, and I can help people go through it. But it's harder for me to support someone who is not even willing to have support. And I would say it's much easier when you face a traumatic situation. It's much easier to count on support, to count on a support system, have mediators, therapists, a friend you can talk to. Because if you try to get over it by yourself, alone, it's just massive work. And
I've used mediation a lot. Like, I'm such a big fan of it now, and I've known what it's like to be. I often compare it to like being told, "Come to the headmaster's office," and like go into this freeze, like be terrified of having a conversation. But then when you actually show up and listen to each other, it all turns into love, or or maybe not immediately, but it needs to happen. The conversation needs to happen, and at the end, I always feel so much better for it. Everything got unraveled, but beforehand can be terrifying. Like, it can really feel like one of the most scary things. And so I think that's that's a big part to get through. And so walk me through a moment of the process that you take people through from the minute that they contact you.
So from the minute a person contacts me for mediation, we have a conversation to understand what they are hoping to achieve. And we evaluate how to contact their counterparts to have that conversation happening. And from there, assuming that the counterpart agrees to have that conversation, then we have preparation calls beforehand. Before putting the two people in the room, I talk to each of them individually and preparing them on how to express what they get to express. So there's a whole structure, safe mediation structure that I use to guide them through. So it's really taking by the hand. You don't need to rehearse or to prepare too much, I take you by your hand.
That's so good to know, because I think even taking the first step can feel really daunting, and it's really good for people to know what to expect as well. So it's good to know that that you have a one-on-one session before suddenly having to meet this person.
And even on the day of the mediation session, it's so normal. People feel like physical tiredness, they feel like sweaty hands, dizziness, blurred vision, diarrhea, nausea, like so many symptoms. The body is really showing resistance. So we take the time it's necessary for them to go through those steps. The most important thing on the day of the mediation is taking care of everybody's nervous system in the room as well. So we co-regulate each other all the time with breath, and we don't jump straight into the room together. There is a whole preparation and meditations and grounding. So when you face your counterpart, you have enough strength and resilience to be in the room.
Yeah. Oh, that sounds so great. I think it's so important for people to know, because there can be it can feel so intimidating for people to, I know that in cases where people sometimes have to go to a court of law and face someone, it can be so terrifying, and there's support for that in the court of law. So it's really great that you are understanding all of that and taking those steps through with people.
Yeah, and once they are in the room, then things start to dissolve and people start to relax, because there is a realization that the person who is there and sitting in front of you is not as terrifying as the projection you had, but from the projection you made about them. That is for both sides.
I always say in my teach trainings, they're not these huge things, but often like roommates have a problem or whatever, and these things can blow up and feel so big if you don't come towards each other. I always say, come towards each other, don't run away, because it can blow up and up and up in your mind through these projections. And yet when you can come together with a shared intention to find resolution, it's, miracles can really happen. So I know the work you're doing is highly confidential, but can you share any, without sharing too much, share any successes, any breakthroughs you've seen? I'm assuming, I know there's a lot of women, for example, who feel boundaries have been crossed with male teachers or male healers, and I'm sure you've handled lots of cases like that. Have you seen anyone receive resolution in a way they weren't expecting?
Yes, absolutely. I would say every session I mediated so far, everybody ended the session feeling much lighter, like more peaceful, finding more understanding, like filling the gaps. The overall feedback is the mediation supports them to fill the gaps. All the assumptions you had in your head to put your story together, now you're getting the input from the other side, and you see a much more big picture that's much more close to reality. So when they look back at the situation of trauma, they find themselves in more compassion for the other side, and forgiveness. I've seen women forgiving men who caused a severe harm in, like when you talk about sexual abuse. So maybe you watching this video now, you think, oh, they're talking about mediation, but my case is very serious, And this restorative justice program, this format of mediation it works, and it has been applied to situations of sexual abuse and even situations of crime. I am more specialized in sexual abuse, and I have colleagues who have worked with like situations of crime, like when the woman saw her father being assassinated, and she could have that type of mediation with the assassin, and they could restore peace and find forgiveness and transmute shadows and transmute unconsciousness that led their old selves to act in a way that is very damaging. So, I mean, the severity of the cases can vary, right? And each person has their own experience, and you can't compare your experience to anybody else's experience. What I'm saying here is, no matter what your experience is, this is a valid avenue to find peace within yourself. I wouldn't say.
Do you think that the perpetrators, for want of a better word, will actually change their behavior? Because I hear so many women, especially, saying, "Well, the reason I want to punish him and stop him and prevent him being a teacher is I don't want him doing this to anyone else." I hear that again and again. So, it's wonderful to a place of reconciliation and forgiveness. But what do you think on the side of the perpetrator? Do you think that they walk out of a session like this really changing their ways? That's the big question.
Yes. Well, I can answer this in two ways. The first way, there are scientific studies in restorative justice field that show that this system actually is the one that encourages the most transformation in the behavior of the perpetrator. much more than going to jail or going to court. My personal experience with my practice shows that the perpetrators, let's call them, they stop causing harm, especially the more they listen to feedback from different people, the more clear to them is where the shadow was, They start realizing during the session and even after the session, like all the times they did something for them, for their own pleasure, not for the sake of healing the client. Yeah. They start realizing how much they don't know about trauma. And then they start studying more and getting more informed about trauma, to understand boundaries, to understand consent, including somatic consent. So there is a curiosity there to learn more about those basic. I would say this knowledge is so fundamental for a Tantra facilitator, for a Tantra practitioner. And because Tantra is not a regulated profession, like a therapist, for example, it's much harder to cover what is the basic curriculum for a Tantra practitioner. So that's a lot of the harm caused is because there is lack of information about the consequences of misusing your power.
So yeah, in a way, these are also learning experiences, right? Where Tantra professionals, through being able to really hear feedback and hear the impact, can actually have real learning and evolve, and presumably share with colleagues. And hopefully, I really hope to see evolution as a field, of getting more trauma informed, getting more aware, really looking at boundaries as a collective. That this would be my hope to see across Tantra, because there's so many gifts there. There's so many gifts in this field. But if there are a few people who are really crossing boundaries, then it can the whole field really bad reputation, right? So it's important for us all to learn.
Yeah, I would say the best people to answer that question, like whether the perpetrator changes behavior or not, are the people who faced the abusive situation and went into mediation with them. Because those people, they are there in the room, they are in direct connection with the perpetrator, and they see how they are receiving the information. They see the authenticity they see the authenticity in them while they are listening to what the
something you can really feel. I had a bound course years ago, and I just kept trying to speak to the facilitator again and again, and he just didn't hear me at all. Just came up with his excuses. You're responsible for yourself. You're responsible for yourself. I got so frustrated. I so would have loved mediation. I so would have loved somebody to help my voice be heard. And the thing I was looking for was for him to register me, not just dismissing me and telling me I'm responsible myself. It's like so frustrating. So I really understand how people get supercharged. I just gave up in the end and thought, well, I'm just going to really make sure that my workshops are the way I want them to be. But, if mediation had been available, I would have really appreciated it. So I'm really glad you're doing this work. So to wrap up here today, what if somebody's watching this and they're like, yeah, I totally have an issue that I would like to resolve. What are the steps they can take? Of course, I can put links with this video and whatever.
Well, it's you can go to safemediation.com and book a call with me, and we can chat about your issue. That would be the quickest way. There is also the Tantra Alliance website you can go to, where you can find more information about how to make the Tantra field safe for everyone to explore sexuality. So these places are ideal for you to go, and let's talk about your situation. And even when it seems like hopeless, or it seems like, oh, maybe that's the case for court or for police, even in those cases, we can still work with the mediation. It's not one thing or the other. It's something that suits
Right.
any situation, actually, when two people are willing to talk.
Yeah, right. So that it's not an either or, it can be there as well, and more fulfilling on the emotional level. I think something that I've noticed, something that I've heard from women, I keep saying women, but of course it could be men as well, but women who I know who have been through these kind of things is that they can get really charged and really go to try and stop the teacher or this person, but then also be left with a kind of feeling of sadness, that one part of them really wanted to stop them, but there was another part that really loved the workshops or really appreciated this teacher. And so it's a bit of a you can be a bit of a mixed bag, that they can end up destroying something that actually did have some value. And I think these situations are very complicated, because often the practices are amazing, or they've had incredible experiences in this workshop, but then there's one piece that really does need to be cleaned up and sorted out. And sometimes we can destroy the whole lot and then feel afterwards almost a little, I've met people who felt like, oh wow, I destroyed everything. And I think it's that's something important as well to bear in mind when stepping forward, is it's a complex, multi-layered situation with different parts to it. And that's just something to bear in mind. And I think the process that you and your team are offering is a very good way to help people to work on things, even if they are going to go ahead with prosecution or other methodologies as well.
I would say it's a very tantric way, because we embrace duality. And most of the cases have this complexity. Most of the cases they have, for example, a woman books a session with a Tantra practitioner, and there were parts of the session that were really amazing and they had a breakthrough, but there were other parts that was messy and boundaries were crossed. And how do you reconcile these two? And in this mediation process, the safe mediation process, we address that, and we acknowledge, and we make space for both. One doesn't exclude the other.
Yeah. Oh, that's so great. I'm so glad that you're breaking that down, because I know that can be super confusing, and it's good to break that down. It's so great to chat with you. I'm so grateful for this work that you've been doing. I think it's been needed for a long time in the Tantra field. And thank you for coming and sharing. And I know that you've also been interviewing some of your clients as well, right? Who wanted to speak about their own process. I think that's really helpful.
Yes.
And helpful for other people to watch. Yeah.
Yes, I think it's more powerful to listen from those who went through the process, because then you can, it can be possible for you as well. If you are considering that process for yourself and you still have any doubts, you can. And even if you want to speak to other women or men who went through the process, you can reach out to me and I can put you in contact with them. So that's also a possibility.
Oh, that's great. That's also great. Wonderful. Thank you so much. Thank you for this interview, and thank you for the work that you do. And I really feel that this is going to help the whole field of Tantra. So.
Thank you so much, Ishashi.